piss your pants.
Piss your pants.
I said piss your pants.
Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the SFX Loop. I am your host, Jay Byrne. This week, I've got a story to tell. It's a story of a little film from 1972 called Last House on the Left, and how it, oddly enough to say, it impacted my life and how it affected my life, and how I connected with elements of the film throughout the years in my life. It'll all make sense as we move forward in this story. So we'll start in the beginning. How did I even, learn about this movie? What did I know? My earliest memory of the film is when I was probably around 7 or 8 years old. I remember, because we used to rent movies from this video store called Video Village that was in Tiverton, Rhode Island. I remember going to Video Village, renting a bunch of movies, and my dad rented, because it was the horror section, which was always terrifying to me as a kid, but I was fascinated with it when I got older. My father would just rent, horror movies, things that were there, and it probably had just come out because around 1984, 85-ish. Yeah, actually, it was probably a new release at that point, which is funny to say because the movie was from 72, but it didn't really hit home video from Vestron Video until the early 80s. So it probably was one of the newer things in the horror section. It's probably the reason why he picked it up and looked at it. And it was a cult classic drive-in movie. And he rented it. And I remember him watching the movie, and I remember me kind of glancing into the living room while he was watching it, and him making me leave the room. Because he's like, no, I don't want you to see this. This is not good for you to be watching at your age. So I remember, that's my first memory of Last House on the Left, and it just stuck with me. When I was in high school, me and my good friend Peter Lambert, this is maybe our junior or senior year, probably junior. It was a junior year in high school. We should just rent horror movies on VHS every single weekend. We would go and we'd rent 2-3 horror movies, and we'd copy them for ourselves, make copies and watch them. And we had heard about this movie, Last House on the Left, through a Fangoria article. This was before David Shulkin wrote a book, which I have the book as well, on the making of Last House on the Left and the controversy surrounding Last House on the Left. And we read the article in Fangoria magazine. There was this article about this notorious movie from the 70s and about what was cut from it and this and that. And we saw the R-rated cut of the film at one point. We had rented it and we had watched it. And honestly, I don't think the movie made that much of an impression on us, other than the fact that we were like, well, this is an interesting movie from the 70s. I wish it didn't have all the good stuff, the violence, the gore or whatever, cut out. And so as we learnt about the fact that there was an uncut version or an unrated version of the movie that came out by Vestron Video, we were always on the lookout for it. And I remember being out food shopping with my mother or something like that. I was probably around 16 years old. And there used to be a major video that was in Fall River, Massachusetts, that I would go to just to find movies and stuff. And I remember going in there and seeing the unrated VHS tape of Last House on the Left sitting on the shelf. And I was like, oh my God, this is the unrated version of Last House on the Left. And I remember calling my buddy Peter Lambert from a payphone while I was out to let him know that I scored it. I rented the unrated version of Last House on the Left. So we were all excited. We were going to see the uncut version of Last House on the Left that was talked about in this Fangoria article that we were kind of obsessed with. Some weird little details about this movie. And so we watched it, and we were like, whoa, check it out. All the extra violence. Kind of brutal. It's really only a couple of seconds in the VHS version. There's more in a later uncut version that came out on a Canadian VHS that I had, because I own that. There was a bootleg, and there was like, there was a Laserdisc bootleg that I had a copy of. There was a Canadian VHS that I bought years later. And we were obsessed with this movie. Let's just put it that way. And then eventually this stuff all came out. There's an Arrow special edition of it now that has that cut. There was an MGM one that had that cut. The longer cut of the movie, which I'll get into in a little bit when I talk about the actor, one of the main actors in the movie, David Hess. So this movie was made by Wes Craven, who made The Hills Have Eyes, Nightmare on Elm Street, classic stuff. Scream, for any of you people from the 90s who know the later Wes Craven type stuff. What are we? Shocker, Serpent in the Rainbow, People Under the Stairs, classics. Wes Craven is known. He also made some made-for-TV movies, Invitation to Hell, Summer of Fear. He was prolific in the horror genre, let's put it that way. So we watched the movie, we enjoyed the movie, whatever. We got obsessed with the details of this movie, and David Shulkin's book came out where he talked about all of these extra stuff in the movie, and we had the book, and we both ordered the book, and I still have my original copy of the book. And we were obsessed with all the making of details of this movie. So let's jump ahead, okay? We had an obsession with the movie, that's obvious. In high school, right before we graduated, we decided, and I'm going to put some footage of that in this video. You get to see my home video footage of this, because I have it. We decided, this is before all the Sean Clark stuff, where people were going and checking out, movie locations and stuff. This is like in the 90s. Probably, it would be like 92, 93, around there. And, we decided we were going to take a day trip because in Connecticut, where they filmed the movie, okay? Westport, Connecticut. I think so. I could be wrong. It's in the clips that you're going to see soon. And we decided we were going to take this road trip to find the locations where the movie... We were going to look for rocks and woods and stuff like that. We were kind of idiots. So we drove all the way up to this place. We ended up there, and we ended up at this place called the Pequot Motor Inn, where they actually stayed while they were making the film. And you know what? I am just going to show you the video that I made in high school, the footage we shot in high school of me and my friends going up there, and that tells that whole story, so check it out.
Can you see this now? I can see the sign, Pequot Motor Inn. We're in Southport, I got you.
We are in Westport,
Southport, actually Westport, Connecticut, home of Last House on the Left. See that building over there across the street? That is the office to the Pequot Motor Inn. That is where they stayed while they were making the movie Last House on the Left. We traveled 180 miles.
We went from exit 89 to exit 19.
I think we should go check in now.
Let's go to the Pequot. We'll be right back.
Alright, ready?
You know the thing is, we're getting closer, see. We went to the place, the Pequot Motor Inn, where they stood. We're gonna get to the disembowelment place sooner or later.
In the woods.
We're finding it. We're going now.
This guy remembers. See?
Look at this, you're on, Mr.
Yeah, he remembers.
You don't.
They stayed here.
Right. Well, we've had a couple of movies here. Of videos.
Do you remember that one?
Well, I don't
Probably.
specifically.
It wasn't filmed, actually. They just stood here. Everyone that was here stood here. That was in the movie.
What year was this from?
1972. Probably like late 71,
older than us.
though.
God, we weren't even born yet.
We had Lassie here in 1958.
There you go. Lassie?
Wow.
The real Lassie.
That's cool.
That's awesome.
And somebody said Paul Newman and Tom Cruise live in the area too. Somebody said.
Yeah, we don't even care about that.
I know. We just came down to see
We
what
just came
everybody
down to
says.
see what our film was made.
We're gonna do something for your last house on the left, Dan. Who likes last house on the left? We got 5.
Phyllis?
You guys isn't cows, it's just
Get away.
little baby cows. Little baby. And the road leads to nowhere, and the castle stays the same. And the father tells the mother to wait for the rain, wait for the rain. And the road and the father tells the mother to wait for the rain, wait for the rain, wait for the rain. And the road leads to nowhere.
So let's jump ahead years later. Now, I don't have all the details on exactly how this happened, but I know it had to do with my friend Peter helped out at some horror convention, and they met David Hess, the actor, the lead actor, through this horror convention. And he was with my friend Liza Bigley, who was a good-looking girl, and most of the guys that met her, you know, wanted to hook up with her, so they were always trying to hit on her. But she was a friend for years. She's in my movie Hometown, and needless to say, they met David Hess. Okay, somehow struck up a friendship with David Hess, and probably because David Hess was a little bit obsessed with Liza, they ended up being able to go to his house. And actually, they stayed with him at his house for a couple days. They met him. They became friends with him. And they met him, and he used to talk to Peter on the phone and everything. And I got to talk to David Hess on the phone. So think about this. A movie I was obsessed with in high school, I ended up being able to talk, like, candidly on the phone with the actor of the film, David Alexander Hess, years later. And it's a cool story. And you know, and it was a big deal to me to actually talk to him and stuff. I actually did meet him in person once, and I'll tell you about that in a second. And that kind of ties into my movie Hometown. So yeah, Peter and Liza, they were good friends with him. They talked to him a lot. They actually visited him up in California and stuff. I never got to do that, but they were closer friends with David Hess than I was. But I did talk to him on the phone, and I, you know, met him in person. Years later, I was at a horror film convention, a Rock and Shock in Worcester, Massachusetts. And I remember, because David Hess was going to be there, and it was the first time I was going to get a chance to meet him. So I actually headed over to his table, and as soon as I told him who I was, I remember him like looking at us and going, "Oh, it's Jay and Katie," because he knew us through my friend Liza and Peter, because we were all really close and we all talked about each other. So he knew of us through them, and I had talked to him on the phone before this point. And so he was all excited. He was Krug in the movie Last House on the Left, David Hess. And I remember him like coming over and giving us hugs and saying, "Oh man," because we had invited him to a wedding, but he wasn't able to come down. And he's like, "I'm so sorry I wasn't able to make it to your wedding," and this and that. And it was like crazy. And behind me was this kind of weirdo kid that I ended up meeting, that I ended up, you know, there's a whole story about Hometown. You can check that out somewhere. Maybe I'll tell that story at some point. But right now, all I know is that led into me making the movie Hometown, because I was going to make a movie with this kid, and he had turned out to be a little bit too much for me to deal with. And so I didn't end up making the movie I was going to make with him, but I made another movie at the time. And he was behind me, and this is where I had met that kid, because he was waiting behind me, and he just wanted to meet David Hess. And he was kind of aggravated because David Hess was talking to us, me and my wife Katie, like he had known us his whole freaking life, and we were old buddies, and like we talked to him for a while, and this and that, and it was really nice. We got to meet him, and we got to talk to him, and he was a really nice guy. David Hess has a brash personality, though. He's one of those type of guys who'll say whatever is on his mind, and he's unfiltered. He says whatever he wants to say. So you got to kind of be used to people like that when you're around David Hess. But he was a really nice guy. He was a great guy. I jump forward to October 7th, 2011. David Hess passed away. And this was probably less than a year after we had met him. Because we met him in like 2010, I think. The tail end of 2010. I don't know. We met him not too much earlier before that. And then he passed away, and I remember that was a sad moment for my friends because they knew him better than I did. Although it did kind of affect me a little bit because it was affecting my friends, and my friend Eliza was really upset by it. She was pretty close to him. And I just remember that it was a very weird time. It's like David Hess passed away, okay. And I think he was 75 when he died. And so while I was making my movie Hometown, I decided, I'm going to dedicate this movie to David Hess. But I didn't want to be like heavy-handed by it. So in the beginning of Hometown, in my first horror film, Hometown, you'll see it says for David. That's for David Hess. It was my way of dedicating the movie to David Hess. Because I even start the movie with the title card from Last House on the Left, because that was my idea. I was going to do that anyway. And I thought it would be kind of cool. It says for David, and there's the title card from Last House on the Left. So it's a nice little connection there. And yeah, that was my way of honoring his memory. I didn't know him anywhere near as well as my friends did. But it's an interesting story that throughout the years, this movie Last House on the Left kind of followed me all the way through, like into my adult life. And it's still like one of my favorite drive-in horror films from the 70s, and it's a rough movie. There's a lot of controversy surrounding the movie. There's all kinds of craziness surrounding the movie. I'm not really going to get into the movie too much, but if you've seen it, you know about it. If you are interested in it, go into it with caution, because this is a roughie. Not the roughest movie you've ever seen, because most of it's kind of campy, but it's a little bit rough. And the versions that you can get of it now are, to the best of my knowledge, completely uncut. Some claim there's extra footage, okay? But I've talked to David Hess himself about this, all right? I actually talked to David Hess, he owned a print. He actually had a print of the film, like at his house, I guess. But he had his own print of the film from the 70s that was supposedly uncut. And he had screened it, and I asked him flat out, I said, is the uncut version of the movie that we see now, the version that MGM put out, at that point was, I think, MGM DVD, Blu-ray, but it's the same version that's available on the Arrow edition. If that was the full version of the movie, and he says it was, he says that's the longest cut that he ever saw of the film. There might have been some extra stuff that was in it that Wes Craven might have cut out. Wes Craven claims he cut extra stuff, or he didn't put back certain things when he did his director's cut because he just felt like he didn't want those things in the movie. I don't really know, but according to David Hess, the version that exists right now is the longest version of the movie that he ever saw. And this is the guy that was in it and was around it during the 70s. He told me stories about how it was hard for him to get like jobs after Last House on the Left because people were afraid of him, because I don't know, they associated him with his character, and it was kind of such a dark movie at the time. There was a lot of controversy surrounding it in the drive-ins. Heck, that movie, there were drive-ins where the drive-in owners actually cut things out of the movie, like with scissors. They cut it out of the film print. So it's very hard to find an uncut film print of that film because they've all been mutilated by drive-in owners. So the few that maybe still exists aren't that easy to come by. But I'm going on and on and on. There's a whole history behind Last House on the Left, and it's a really fascinating history, but I just wanted to talk about my personal connection with the movie and my history with it, and, how I actually got to meet David Hess years later, and, yeah, how it's really weird how certain things like that follow you. I've got other things like that in my life as well. Like I have a friend that lives in California that's very good friends with Marilyn Manson, and I was a huge Marilyn Manson fan at one point. I've never met Marilyn Manson or talked to Marilyn Manson, but there's a connection there as well. I've got these weird connections throughout my life. But it's like, it's never a direct connection. It's through somebody I know, but it's somebody I know well. It's not like an acquaintance. It's a good, really close, good friend. But David Hess was the biggest one. David Hess was the biggest one, and he was a great person. He was a nice guy. He was a really good person, and he had a good heart, from what I could tell. And he, you know, from what my friends had told me, and they had met him, and when I talked to him and when I met him, just seemed like a really nice person. Which is funny because of how he portrayed himself on film. I mean, he was like the ultimate baddie in 70s drive-in cinema. But he was a musician as well. He prided himself more on his music. So yeah, and he wrote songs for Elvis Presley in the early 50s. He wrote a single for Elvis Presley I think it's I Got Stung is the name of the single. But yeah, we always loved the soundtrack to Last House on the Left because it was David Hess's music. It's like this folky 70s style stuff. But there you go. There's my story. There's my connection with Last House on the Left, and yeah, how it followed me throughout the years, and I don't know. It's an interesting story, I think. But I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got something out of the story. If you like this kind of content, like, subscribe, leave me a comment. You got some cool stories like this, let me know. You know, I alternate between the effects loop and the SFX loop. So if you're watching the SFX loop this week, the effects loop will be next week, and that'll be guitar related or gear related. And I got some cool videos coming up for that stuff. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed. I've been Jay Byrne, your host. Take care. See you next time.